This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. The tragic story of a locally beloved cougar being killed near Canmore, Alberta earlier this year was heartbreaking. John Marriott, an award-winning wildlife photographer and co-founder of Exposed Wildlife Conservancy, shared his harrowing experience with Defender Radio, along with his discovery of 2 cougar kits, orphaned by the incident. Now, several months later, the cougar kits have been transferred to Parc Safari in Quebec, and the outcry for policy change in Alberta rages on. To share more about these updates and introduce the new executive director of Exposed Wildlife Conservancy, John Marriott and Maggie Spizziri join Defender Radio. John, can you walk us through what's happened with the orphan cougar cubs in Alberta, and maybe just the sort of the brief version of that story, and what led to them ultimately being sent to a zoo in Quebec?
So on Monday, February 10th of this past winter, 2025, I encountered cougar hunters within a day, within 24 hours, had figured out that they had actually killed the female cougar that I'd followed for the last 4 years and caught on trail cam a bunch of times and had seen once. And soon after that, discovered that there were 2 orphaned kittens, caught them on a trail camera and had found tracks. And within 5 days, Fish and Wildlife had come out, started an investigation into an illegal hunt, and had also set up traps and captured the orphaned kittens. And they then went on a bit of a whirlwind. I think many of my followers and the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy followers and the Fur Bearer followers went on a bit of a whirlwind journey with me and the kittens, as well as my social media erupted and people were following this story really closely, and it got a lot of media attention. And the kittens first went to Cochrane, to a fish and wildlife holding facility for about 72 hours, were then reluctantly accepted by the Calgary Zoo, who didn't have space for them, but took them on short term for a couple of weeks before they were moved to Greater Vancouver Zoo, which agreed to be their sort of detainment facility while they went through quarantine. And during that time, biologists within Alberta Fish and Wildlife were arranging a permanent home for them, and they were accepted into Parc Safari, which is an hour south of Montreal. And they arrived there about a month ago now, and have been getting used to their new long-term permanent home at Parc Safari. So unfortunately, they will never have a life in the wild now. But they do have a home at an accredited zoo facility here in Canada.
Were there other alternatives? Were there options for these cubs? Or once their mother had been killed in such a tragic way, was it really just what can we do to minimize harm at this point?
At that point, it was what can we do to minimize harm? There is no rehabilitation of cougars allowed really anywhere in North America. So that was not an option to rehab the kittens. There were a couple of places that probably would have been, arguably even better than zoos, where they wouldn't have been viewed, where they would have just had sort of shelter and a good life away from people. But those places are pretty few and far between, and very quickly discovered that wasn't going to be an option either. So then it came down to zoos. And in my mind, the best zoo would have been the Calgary Zoo, because then the story would have stayed in Alberta and would have stayed really public. I think Minister Lowen may not have loved that, but really when it came down to it, the Cougar Zoo just didn't have room. Yeah. And so they just weren't able to take them on. They didn't have an enclosure that would have been suitable for them. So then it just came to, how do we minimize the damage at this point? And really the only other option was to euthanize them, which I certainly was not in favor of, or to leave them out there to starve to death in the wild, which I also wasn't in favor of. So really, of the sort of the poorest options, putting them in a zoo was it allows their story to continue to be told. for years and years. It allows them to kind of be ambassadors for what happens with cougar hunting in Alberta and in Western Canada and throughout North America. So I think there's still a lot of good that can come out of this, despite really what is a pretty tragic ending.
It really is. And Maggie, I'm curious. You're new at the organization, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But as sort of maybe an introduction, and I think maybe your introduction to the work of Exposed, you would have seen a lot of this firsthand. How would you quantify that public response? How would you qualify it? And was it sort of something surprising to you? Does it make sense? Anything like that?
Yeah, I don't think it was really surprising. I think it makes sense, especially for something that was so public and hit so close to home for a lot of people. Um, and it was interesting stepping into the organization kind of right after the incident had happened. And at that exact same time, there was some changes in regards to what was happening with the provincial government as well. So that was kind of my introduction to the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy and taking a look at all of those kind of different pieces and hearing from everybody and what their thoughts were from all sides and taking that in and then formulating a response. But yeah, I don't think it's surprising. You know, people care about wildlife, people care about their own lives and their safety of their own lives, and people go hunting, and all of those things should be allowed in something that is safe and comfortable for all involved.
It's been an interesting series of conversations, perhaps. We're watching all of this unfold and talking about Alberta policy and predator management. If either of you want to take this, are there any clear shortcomings today? We're right up against September when we're recording this. Is there a clear line of this is what's not working and where we can get better versus it's maybe a whole system that needs to be looked at?
Yeah, I would almost say it's almost the whole system that needs to be looked at. There's been a lot of changes that have happened this year as well. The most recent just over the past month, like earlier this month, in changing even the caliber of rifles and lowering the age of children being able to hunt, and all kinds of things. And one of the things that wasn't transparent in those decisions that were made is why or how. Where was the data? Where was the science behind it to justify those decisions? So one of the things that we're advocating for at the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy is that transparency and inclusion of everybody involved. If we're going to be making these big decisions that affects, you know, the youth, that affects, you know, when you're lowering the caliber of weapon, how quickly an animal dies. So, you know, those types of things, I think it's important to take a look at it from a variety of angles and not just one. And that feels a little like it's a little bit missing. So that's something that we are advocating heavily for.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there are decisions being made from the hip, to, turn a phrase appropriately. Um, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of forethought or even just the planning of it. You know, you expect a regulatory change like this when they're presented. Oh, we're going to put it out to the public. We're going to put it out to these specific stakeholder groups. And I think, John, you're at that annex of a conservationist, wildlife professional photographer, tour operator, all of these things. And I'm curious, were you asked to participate in any of that?
No, and I think that's one of the things that we Exposed are quite concerned about, and other environmental organizations here in Alberta have also spoken out in that there is just this lack of transparency, this lack of science. To use cougars as an example, a crystal clear example, there is a very good cougar management plan in Alberta, written by our provincial carnivore biologists, with a tremendous amount of research and science put into it. And the most recent decisions in Alberta, policy decisions related to cougars that have dramatically increased female cougar quotas. So females are the ones that really direct the population and keep the population stable. And so that generally in cougar hunts, you don't allow a lot of hunting of females because you can orphan a lot of kittens because 80% of their lives, female cougars have kittens, but also because they're what keep that population stable. And so we have a great cougar management plan, and these last few regulatory changes have veered away quite considerably from that plan without any data or science to back it up. And in fact, the government has muzzled the carnivore biologists and other biologists within the department. Nobody's able to talk to the media, conservation organizations. We put in repeated requests to some of these biologists, and we don't hear a thing. So it's just this bringing back transparency, bringing back clear data behind decisions. I think Alberta was actually doing a pretty good job of it in many things, like grizzly bear management, where, in quite recently in the last 20 years, put in a ban on grizzly bear hunting, did a lot of research to determine what level the population was at. That also has fallen completely off in the last 5 or 6 years. Where there's currently no grizzly bear research going on into population levels. And so we're starting to lose track of the data and the science. And it's going to be interesting to see what decisions come up in the future here and if they're transparent or not.
Yeah, it's interesting too, the way you're talking about the current, even looking back within this last 20 years. I do wonder, is there an element of populism in politics and of misinformation and public perception leading the way?
Yeah, I think from the exposed perspective, it's hard to say. I mean, I can't speak for the people making the decisions, and because they're so closed doors, it's hard to know where those decisions or how those decisions are being made from. But what we do know is that, from my perspective, it would be that there's not as many different types of organizations being brought to the table to make decisions. So in that, I would say you're missing or lacking information because you're not getting it from that full circle side of things. So the decisions that are being made may not have the best interest of everybody at heart because all of the information isn't available to the people making those decisions.
And that's always frustrating. As a former journalist in my current position, it's like, just let us know. The information's there. You're choosing not to share any of it. And that really does start to inform public perception as well. Because in the absence of information, I find we have a real good habit of coming up with our own, especially with social media these days.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things, like, governments and nonprofits and community organizations have always worked really closely together. And it's one of those areas and spaces when that collaboration is opened up and made available, they can lean on each other, and nonprofits can go out and really collect all of the data to be able to make all of those informed decisions. So it would be really lovely moving forward if we could kind of get back to that collaborative approach and be able to lean on each other and say, hey, we're here to help. We're here for you, and, utilize all of the knowledge and all of the expertise that is available in these nonprofit and community organizations.
I think, Michael's speaking back to the populism just for a second, so sort of stepping outside of exposed and just speaking to it. I think if you look at the cougar incident, just the outroar from the public, the uproar from the public, really gives an indication that a lot of people, a lot of society is not happy right now with some of these recent changes and management decisions. And we see that in letters and petitions, letters that we've had that have had thousands of submissions, petitions that Alberta Wilderness Association has submitted that have had thousands of submissions, that there's a lot of people out there that want change. And it's something, I think, back to speaking a bit for Exposed, that Exposed is really looking for. Like Maggie said, getting back to that collaborative approach and to managing wildlife with a scientific and a transparent background.
Yeah, and there was even an article recently. I was just looking, and I can't find it, but I'll look it up before we publish and put it in the show notes. That was effectively showing through the scientific method, through research, that in this one instance where conservationists and consumptive users disagree on all kinds of things, but when it came to protecting subset of species, protecting habitat, there is a constant crossover. There is so many shared values within this. And I think it speaks to the degree of nuance and culture involved in all of it. So it does feel surprising that they're not inviting more people to the table. They're not bringing in these opposing views, because that really is how you get a full picture. You get, as you said, Maggie, you get a better idea of what everyone thinks and everyone wants, and it can lead to better outcomes for all policy. And as noted too, I think a lot of people in the face of this end up feeling powerless. They feel frustrated. You're against the wall. Say, various colorful language may escape my lips when I'm not on the microphone about these things. So for those of us who are frustrated and are or are not within Alberta, are there any clear steps people can be taking right now to try and influence this or address this problem related to wildlife policy in Alberta?
Yeah, so both ourselves, as well as the Alberta Wildlife Association, has petitions going on our respective websites that are available. As well, I think, though, the most impactful thing to do is contact your local MLA. They're there to support their communities that they're in, and they're, I won't speak for everybody, but most often very lovely, kind humans that are, willing to listen. That's their job. They're willing to listen and report back. And if we have people reaching out to their MLAs, I think that would be a really incredible impact.
I think also for people that don't live within the province of Alberta, it's really key. For instance, if you're a wildlife photographer from Ontario and you love coming out and photographing in Banff and Jasper and traveling around in Alberta and spending your money here, it would be great to let our Minister of Tourism, Joseph Chow, know that, and that you're not happy with some of these decisions being made. And, I think Canadians and Americans need to feel like they do have a say in how wildlife is managed in other jurisdictions besides the ones that they live in. And so this is usually done via money. So if you can put a financial lean into some of this stuff and say, hey, I spend 10 grand a year and come out to Alberta, that is going to make people listen. And it's not going to make ministers happy if they learn that there are a lot of people out there that are not happy with what's going on in Alberta with our wildlife management.
Absolutely. And on a more positive note, congratulations on the new role, Maggie. As we mentioned at the top, this is a relatively new position for you, and I wanted to get through some of the Cougar news and catch up on all of that and talk about our current situation. But can you share a bit more about your background and what drew you to Exposed Wildlife Conservancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came onto the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy in April. Previous to that, I was working in Revelstoke, BC as the Revelstoke Bearware Society Executive Director there. So I had that role for about just over 8 years, where we worked hard on reducing the number of black bear deaths and grizzly bear deaths within the community, just educating based on coexistence. And we were able to reduce that from about 27 bears per year to just down to 6. So we were making significant progress there. And I think it's just, for me in general, wildlife and especially apex predators held an incredible fascination. They're unlike other wildlife that, lives around us. Just their stature and how they present themselves and the biology and all of the little tiny fascinating things has always driven me to there. And a local artist actually in Revelstoke had donated a artwork piece to Exposed a couple of years ago for a silent auction, and she was telling me all about it and how incredible it was. And that's kind of when I started following and just kind of kept tabs on it and was following through. And then when I saw the job posting come up, I just felt very called to apply, and it felt like a perfect fit for me. I was going through big life change as it does as life rolls through, and yeah, I decided to take the leap, and it's been an absolute blast working with John and the team, both operational and on the board. People that are just so full of passion and excitement and really driving for big change out here on the West Coast. And that's what I'm here for.
Are there any urgent priorities or significant priorities for the organization coming up in the next year or so that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be diving headfirst into a lot of advocacy and policy work. So in both provinces, so keeping an eye on what's happening in British Columbia with the grizzly bears as there's rumblings happening. So, making sure we're digging into some research projects in regards to that and keeping our ear to the ground. And then in Alberta, obviously, with all of the things that are happening with the cougars and grizzly bears and all of the recent changes, diving into some interesting research projects to be able to present fact-based, science-based information to the government to help with those decision makings and say, hey, this is actually what's happening with grizzly bears. This is actually what's happening with cougars. Here's some updated information moving forwards on how we can, do management of apex predators and what that looks like for the province. So those are our advocacy pieces, and then diving into a few big projects. So taking a look at what buffer zones could do for surrounding national parks and making sure that, just in general, when you think of wildlife and how they move throughout not only our communities, but through the valleys, there's all kinds of things that they come across, whether that's railway lines or mines or forestry or, people taking photos. Like there's a whole kind of sphere that we live all with all kinds of different wildlife. So taking a look at that and saying, hey, are we really blocking any major corridors that could help with deaths on a highway or along those lines? So digging into those kinds of projects as well. So we're very excited.
Yeah, the wildlife connectivity and ecological connectivity, I think, especially as we continue to fragment habitats, both rural and urban, is more and more a part of the conversation. And folks who are interested in that, go back through the catalog of the podcast, because John and I have talked about a couple of those issues in the past, I know, around the railway lines and outside of some of the national parks. And John, I'm curious, as co-founder, as very much the face of the organization and the person who has brought a lot of awareness to it, what excites you about this leadership transition and the direction that EWC is moving in?
Well, I think it's key to have sort of another face on the team. Like I'm super excited to see Maggie not only join us, but be, on podcasts, in media, just starting to add to our voice, because I don't want people to get tired of just seeing me all the time, always being the one out there harping and advocating and so on. So I think that's key, to have someone that's behind the scenes doing all the hard work, because that's really what Maggie's doing. She's doing all the organization, running our quickly growing staff. It's super exciting just to see the growth within the organization just in the last 8 months, basically, where, we've got a part-time executive director. Now Maggie's all of a sudden full-time within 6 months. We've hired communications and outreach manager. We've still got our original employee Lance on board. So it's just really exciting for us on the board, and for Kim and I as co-founders to see this growth and to see all these projects that we've kind of had that we want to talk about and we want to get into, and we just have never had the time. And now all of a sudden we've got people working on it all the time. And it's inspiring. And I think, it's needed right now in the environmental landscape, because, there's only so many organizations that have been around, and to have somebody new come in and pump fresh blood in, if you will, I think is really vital for the wildlife conservation movement in Canada. And so I think Maggie can be just a huge help on that, and already has been. You can see it. I mean, I think people, when they hear her voice and when they see this, are right away going to be going, yeah, this is a person that sounds like they know what they're talking about. This is awesome.
Well, and I'll say it's something a lot of folks don't realize is the amount of organizational fortitude that is necessary in this business is overwhelming on the good days, I would say. So that's certainly having someone come onto your team who's really going to have that focus and help drive things makes all the difference. It takes great ideas and makes them into outstanding, sustainable, lasting projects and programs. So we're all very excited as well over at the Fur Bears to see what's next. And to wrap up, for folks who are listening and want to help, whether it's raising awareness, donating, or volunteering, what's the best way to get involved with Exposed Wildlife Conservancy today?
The best way would be to connect with us on either social media or sign up for our newsletters. Or again, like you said, donate, say hi, reach out. We're always on the socials and willing to chat and really open to hearing what people are talking about and what they care about and what they would like to see changed.
Awesome. Is there anything else either of you want to include in this that I didn't get to?
I do think it's worth mentioning potentially that we've got quite a bit more trapped in the past work still to come. So our project that we've been working in collaboration with the Fur Bearers on, that is far from dead. It is Maggie has been working hard on it. We've got all sorts of different tentacles reaching out all over the place. So I think Fur Bearers followers will be really excited to know that that's not something that's just going to die and fade away with the videos that we've already done, that there's all sorts of other work that is coming too.
To learn more about Exposed Wildlife Conservancy and their work, visit exposedwildlifeconservancy.org or find them on social media. Links are available in the show notes for this episode in your podcast player. I want to thank Maggie and John for their time and sharing the exciting work EWC is undertaking. And I want to thank you for listening. You can follow the Fur Bears on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Blue Sky for regular updates on the podcast and other campaigns and programs from the Fur Bears. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bears, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.